Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Jim Powell, Editorial Director at TDWI, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about what's ahead in analytics in 2021. Our sponsors are Magnitude Software, SAP, and Wine Enterprise by Grape City. For our presentations today, we'll first hear from Fern Halper with TDWI, and after Fern speaks, we'll begin our roundtable. But before I turn over the time to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of the presentation and roundtable, our speakers will host a question and answer period. If at any time during these presentations you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen to type in your question and send it over. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, click on the Help area located below the slide window and you'll receive technical assistance. If you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter with fellow attendees, just include the hashtag TDWI in your tweets. Finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the Click Here for a PDF line there on the left middle of your console. In addition, we are recording today's event, and we'll be emailing you a link to an archive version so you can view the presentation again later if you choose, or if you choose to share it with a colleague. Okay, again, today we're going to be talking about what's ahead in analytics in 2021. Our first speaker today is Fern Halper, PhD, TDWI Vice President, and Senior Director of TDWI Research for Advanced Analytics. Well known in the analytics community, Fern has published hundreds of articles, research reports, speeches, and webinars on data mining and information technology during the past 20 years. Fern is also co-author of several dummies books on cloud computing, the hybrid cloud, and big data. At TDWI, she focuses on advanced analytics, including predictive analytics, social media analysis, text analytics, cloud computing, and big data analytics approaches. She has been a partner at industry analyst firm Hurwitz & Associates and a lead analyst for Bell Labs. Her PhD is from Texas A&M University. Fern, I'll turn things over to you here.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar today on what's ahead in 2021. We know that you're busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us. So this is one of my favorite webinars to host because I always like looking at trends and hearing from others about what they think is ahead. So this is what we're going to do. First, I'm going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes talking about the trends that we're seeing at TDWI in analytics. And then we'll have a panel discussion, as Jim mentioned, about 35 minutes or so with our esteemed panelists, who you'll meet in a few minutes, to get their insights. And be thinking about your questions, too, because we're going to have a Q&A after the panel, as Jim mentioned. Okay, so 2020, by all accounts, was a pretty unsettling, and honestly, it was a terrible year. COVID-19 and the ensuing economic impact, I think, really turned the world upside down. So I'd be really remiss if I didn't say something about it. What we saw were layoffs and furloughs, even among data and analytics professionals. For example, in a survey that we did in the spring at the start of the pandemic, about 15% of respondents said that there had been layoffs among their colleagues. With the survey that we have out now, it looks like that number is a little bit higher than that. So layoffs and furloughs, we saw organizations pivoting in terms of data and analytics. We saw them change the nature of some of the analytics work that they were doing in terms of new types of data that they were collecting, the types of analytics that they were performing, the frequency of the tasks, so if they were doing forecasts, they kept having to sort of update their forecasts. I do think, however, that it solidified the need for organizations to understand customer behavior. And what we saw was that, organizations were moving, about a third of them at least, were moving into more advanced analytics to try to help to do that as well. We saw organizations needing more data access to the data that they already had there, as I mentioned, dealing with new data types and other impacts as well. And additionally, as part of COVID, 19, like probably in part due to COVID-19, we saw the acceleration of digital transformation. So as one respondent put it, the COVID converged with several other initiatives that are part of a global transformation. It's a contributing factor to the acceleration. And I have here, I'm going to include some early stats from the survey that's in the field now. As a reminder to myself, yes, we have the survey in the field now that's actually saying that organizations are moving ahead with their digital transformation. They agreed with the statement that they're moving ahead faster than they originally thought that they would. And, certainly we've been seeing throughout part of 2020 an accelerated move to the cloud. So I also want to talk about not just COVID, let's not just stay there. I want to talk about three main trends that we're seeing at TDWI. And the first one is one that is around analytics. So analytics trends from 2020 are going to continue to grow. So in 2020 and even in 2019, we saw that main priorities among organizations were things like self-service, and we saw that machine learning, the demand for machine learning was increasing, and those trends are going to continue to grow in 2021. They're multi-year trends. I'm also going to talk about automation and auto ML, and how that is going to continue to grow as well. Then I'm going to talk about unified and trusted data as a second trend for advanced analytics or for analytics in general. What we're seeing is organizations looking more at a way to actually unify their data, be that via stacks or platforms or fabrics, and things like governance is becoming more important to trust the data. It's always been important, but it's a real top priority. And, this move to use catalogs, this technology to help with that. And finally, for advanced analytics, we're seeing that deploying models into production is becoming more important. I'll talk about that and sort of the rise of containerization. So those are the three trends that I'll talk about. So let's move to the first one. I'm calling it 1A because I have 1B also. So the first part of the first trend is that self-service and machine learning is going to continue to grow. We're seeing in our surveys in the field right now that self-service continues to be a top analytics priority. And that means that training and data literacy are going to become more important in 2021. As organizations, they want to move their digital transformations forward. That requires self-service is often part of that, and that means that data literacy in terms of understanding the data, being able to interpret the data, being able to communicate results, all of that is going to be really important. So I think that training and data literacy is going to become even more important in 2021. And as I mentioned, the demand for machine learning is going to continue to increase. I mentioned that we have these surveys in the field now. We've been tracking this for a couple of years, and it looks like that the numbers, we saw 71% said that the demand was increasing. The numbers this year seem to be in the same ballpark at least as in 2020. And along with the demand for machine learning increasing, we also expect to see more models put into production. So the scaling of machine learning models. Typically, I'd say in early 2020 and 2019, people were thinking about building the models. They weren't necessarily thinking about putting them into production. And so typically, we have seen that organizations that have machine learning models in production have 3 to 5 models in production. And so we expect that number to increase in 2021. And I have here 1B, and that's in part because of automation and augmentation. So we're seeing that automation includes things like robotic process automation and bots, that those are going to start to grow more in 2021. And as well as, automating things like data pipelines, that's becoming very important as analytics become more complex. When we talk to data scientists, when we say, what do you need? They say the one thing we need more data engineers, to put these pipelines together. So, we're seeing automation across the whole data and analytics lifecycle with data pipelines, becoming part of that. We're going to see, more around automation in terms of RPA types of automation in areas like claims processing and so on. And I want to also focus on the fact that augmentation is going to continue to grow as part of this whole automation thing also. So what we see is tools like automated machine learning are growing in adoption. So these tools provide easy-to-use interfaces that automate the building of predictive analytics and machine learning models. So they provide value for data scientists in terms of making them more productive. So, for example, some of these tools will actually provide ways, to automate certain repetitive tasks like splitting samples, or they may provide automated hyperparameterization tuning. And so that's helping the data scientists become more productive, and also business analysts are interested in these types of tools to do more complex work like building models. What we see is that, I mentioned this last year, is that organizations are starting to upskill business analysts to become data scientists. And the early data that we're getting seems to suggest that the upskilling is showing signs that it's working, as part of a way to build more competency in data science. I'll know more in the beginning part of 2021. But part of the strategy around this means using these automated and augmented tools. So organizations are looking to those automated and augmented tools for that. Of course, the business analyst still needs to understand something about the models that he or she is putting into production, because they're going to have to defend them and interpret the results, another form of data literacy. That's going to be important. But, we do see that that's what's happening, and that's going to continue. So the second trend is around, so the first trend was around analytics, and the second trend is around unified platforms. And those are unified platforms to support analytics and advanced analytics like machine learning. So organizations are looking to put platforms in place to support all of this. And oftentimes these platforms are in the cloud, and we're seeing the adoption of cloud data platforms that include things like cloud data warehouses and cloud data lakes. Those are continuing to grow, and I put their stat here to remind myself, yes, in this new data that we're looking at, it seems like the cloud data warehouse is growing sort of even more as we move into 2021. In 2020, we saw that it was entering sort of the early mainstream with about 30% adoption, and that number is increasing into the upper 30s, low 40% adoption among our audience. So the idea with the unified platform with trusted data is to support analytics, and particularly advanced analytics. And it's not just the cloud, platform. There's other ways that organizations are looking to unify their data. As I mentioned, they're using stacks, they're using data fabrics, data virtualization, that sort of thing. But, with the movement to the cloud, these other platforms have, these other services, I should say, because that's how they're being offered. Cloud data warehouse services, cloud data lake services, security services, and so on. All of that's being used for analytics. And along with that, we see these multi-platform strategies which aren't going away. So it doesn't mean that the multi-platform strategy is going away. The organizations are going to continue to outgrow their current environments and move to new platforms like the cloud for analytics. So they may have one platform for reporting and dashboards that may be on premises, and another that supports more advanced analytics in the cloud. And additionally, more organizations are looking at this cloud-first strategy, which means that there's an organizational commitment to evaluate cloud-based solutions before considering other alternatives. I also want to mention that with the unification notion also comes the adoption of some new tooling like modern data catalogs to help with data access and build trusted data. And we see that that was a priority in 2020, and it's still a priority in 2021. So the modern catalog is providing information about data, metadata, data lineage. It's going to provide a way to certify data, rate data, and even identify sensitive data and help to integrate data. So we're going to be hearing a lot more about unified data in 2021. We're going to be hearing a lot more about trusted data because honestly, organizations are on the fence, in terms of in terms of whether they trust their data. So they're looking, to actually build more trust in it. And finally, we're looking at new deployment models. So as I mentioned, organizations are going to be deploying more machine learning models. And what we see is that containers are gaining popularity for deploying more advanced analytics, as well as for other purposes. So for those of you that aren't familiar with containerization, that involves packaging up software code and all of its dependencies in a container so the software can run on practically any infrastructure. And what we're seeing is that containers are definitely becoming popular. So in a recent survey, for example, we saw 25% of respondents already using containers. And so they're packaging up the code, the dependencies, the tools, the libraries, the config files, all of that into a container. And so I'm expecting 2021 to be the year of a container for machine learning deployments because organizations have been looking at ways to deploy these models using different frameworks and APIs. And here's another way that at least it seems early on that organizations are having some success with that. So along with this, as organizations scale the number of models that they have in production, they're going to need new roles for that. That's going to include roles like machine learning ops, MLOps, or model ops, some organizations call it. Every organization has a different name. So this is a highly technical team who's responsible for model management and monitoring. They're responsible for validating models, registering them, deploying them, monitoring them, retraining them. And, what we see today is that data scientists are responsible for this, but what I expect is that the organizations are going to be looking more seriously into hiring MLOps or whatever you want to call them, those teams in 2021 as they scale the number of models in production. So those are my three predictions, if you will, for 2021. I'm going to hand it back over to Jim to introduce our panelists, and then we'll get into the panel discussion. So Jim, back over to you.
Thank you, Fern. Just a quick reminder to our audience, if you have a question, you can enter it at any time in the Ask a Question window. We'll be answering audience questions in the final portion of our program. So it's time for our roundtable. We're joined by Darren Pierce from Magnitude Software. Darren serves as the CTO and head of product for Magnitude Software and works closely with more than half of the Fortune 500 companies that are its customers to help them deliver continuous intelligence and process automation for their most valuable enterprise data. Jason Young, Vice President, Center of Excellence, Data and Analytics, SAP, leads a team of analytics subject matter experts that evangelize, build demand, create innovative plays, and drive customer success for SAP's portfolio of analytics solutions. And Bhupesh Malhotra, Product Manager for Wine Enterprise by Grape City, has over 20 years of experience working with international organizations to design, define, and implement business information management software involving BI platforms, CRM systems, ERP, and more. Welcome, gentlemen. Fern, let's get started with your first question.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. So the first question is, how has COVID impacted your customers in 2020? I talked about what we saw overall, but how has it impacted your customers? And what do you see happening in 2021? So Darren, I'll turn this over to you first, and maybe if you want, before you answer the question, you can tell us a little bit about your company, like give us the elevator pitch for people who may not be familiar with Magnitude. So Darren, you want to take that one first?
Sure. Thanks, Fern, and great to be with you guys today. So Magnitude, we focus on providing continuous intelligence that really drives automated as well as facilitated action within the enterprise. And to do that, we partner with leading providers of enterprise data such as SAP and Oracle and deliver process analytics that are really focused on identifying bottlenecks, process improvement opportunities for the most valuable data inside their enterprise. Our customers think about this as sort of the spinal fluid data that runs the enterprise, that allows you to turn raw materials into finished products and finished products into sales orders and invoices. We connect those insights to action through our process automation capabilities that directly integrate with those leading application systems, and they enable the customers to accelerate update activities through things like supply chain, asset management, and financials adjustments inside those solutions. So to answer your question about COVID, obviously it's impacted every organization in different ways. Given our focus in serving customers that have heavy investments around their SAP and Oracle ecosystems as sort of their core enterprise applications, we serve obviously some very large customers with our continuous intelligence solutions, and a lot of those customers have a heavy reliance on supply chain operations and finance. And so we've done a lot of work with, for instance, in the healthcare space, providers of PPE equipment, and also in the perishable consumer goods space, as organizations really have sought to rapidly reconfigure their supply chain in the face of the COVID flare-ups. So maybe an example, a top 3 consumer goods provider that distributes to all the major retailers across the US and globally. And they really sought to reprioritize and reestablish, at really low latencies. And I think that's the key, change, and at massive amounts of disruptions in the supply chain. As in new infection hotspots, spun up in different distribution centers or in food processing plants, across the enterprise. Unlike in the past, with those experiences, those shifts really led to fairly dramatic changes in demand and fulfillment plans, everything from rerouting international services to having to acquire and invest in new partnerships and relationships to meet those demands. The other thing we saw, which I think you touched on, which is absolutely the case pervasively across, far more broadly than that purview, is the shift towards cloud. The pace of acceleration was just incredible throughout 2020, and we saw most customers doing it not just for easy facilitation of information sharing, but also to facilitate innovation, leveraging the advanced techniques available to them as part of the cloud platform technologies. And we work closely with all 3 of the leading hyperscalers to support this, what typically you would have called heterogeneous, which incorporated the enterprise. Now we think about the hyperscalers supporting cloud to at-home analytics delivery across that heterogeneous environment. So those are the major changes we saw in 2020, Fern.
Yeah, that's interesting. And there was a question that came in from an audience member about supply chain, so you already answered that. That's great. Jason, how about you? What changes have you seen, how COVID has impacted customers? And do you want to say a few words about SAP, who will put you to the test in terms of saying just a few words about SAP and what it does?
Yeah, I'll just keep it pretty brief. So SAP, hopefully most of you guys know about SAP, but SAP is basically the largest market leader in terms of enterprise application software. And so we help companies of all sizes across all industries basically run it its best. And so one thing that maybe you guys don't know is we provide a lot of very advanced analytics technologies to really help transform our customers' businesses into intelligent enterprises. Now, in terms of COVID, I guess what I've found, and Fern, I guess what I would say to you, what I've noticed in your kind of trends is I couldn't agree more with all the things that you pointed out. What we found is COVID's had a huge impact on every organization. For a lot of customers I work with, it's had a huge, if not devastating impact on them, some a little bit more milder, and some have actually thrived in the tech industry, for example. But across all of the customers I worked with, analytics has become almost like much more instrumental than it's ever been. And even for the hardest hit customers, I've been finding a few of them that I've worked with, they're looking at analytics much more closely to identify really how they can optimize costs and preserve margins. And cost is an interesting thing, because when you look at cost, there's a lot of different ways you could save costs that are not very obvious. So, for example, we've had a lot of customers use analytics to identify spots where they can renegotiate rates with vendors. They found a lot of hidden financial costs they didn't know it had existed. They understood all these different costs within their workforce they didn't know existed. So there's a lot of huge areas that I would call quick wins where you could start to use analytics to really optimize your costs. And another trend I've seen is for other customers, many have started to kind of reshift their business and develop new business models. And they've used analytics in kind of two main ways to help with this kind of COVID impact. One is to make better decisions and better information off data. So if you're going to start to adjust and start to place bets in somewhere, the first question you're going to start asking is, what is the data showing you? What's kind of what kind of levers can we press? Why should we make this investment? And the other thing, too, is as they started to shift into these new business models, very, very quickly, they've been getting asked lots and lots of questions about how is this working? What kind of return are we getting? And very quickly, they want to start to know, do we kind of keep this going or do we pull the plug? But the bigger trend from a COVID perspective is it's all about data. And I think now more than ever, every decision, every little bit that people are making, everything's being scrutinized. And people are always asking, what data do you have to justify this decision? So that's what I've been seeing in our customer base. And I just see this kind of continuing to get bigger and bigger in 2021.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. It's interesting because a lot of the people we talk to would say, if there's a silver lining in all of this, which is hard to find, but, you're right, some organizations do thrive. We do see organizations actually increasing the number of people that they're hiring. I don't know if that's because they're thriving or trying to survive, but, a lot of the analysts we talked to said, my work is finally getting realized, and I'm finally getting to do analytics, and we're getting a lot more visibility, and that sort of thing. So to your point, completely agree with that also. Bhupesh, how about you? You want to tell us a little bit about Wine Grape City and how has COVID impacted your customers in 2020?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Wine Enterprise essentially is a secured embeddable BI platform. We're focusing more on end users for them to be able to create and manage their own reports and dashboards. So really the visualization part of all this analytics that we've been talking about, Jason and Darren have kind of delved quite deep into that. So from the product perspective, from really getting this out to the end users and getting it into their hands, we're there to help with that embedded BI and that self-service, and at the end of the day, to make it more affordable. And that's kind of what leads me into that COVID question as well. Jason touched quite heavily upon this towards the end, that we do see that our customers are becoming more cost sensitive. They are looking for, like Jason said, ways to reduce cost, but at the same time, we're seeing an uptake on customers wanting to focus more on analytics. Data has been kind of the big thing to come out from this COVID pandemic. So we're seeing that value of data becoming more valuable over time and over this last year. And analytics with the data pipeline and then capabilities of bringing that data to the business users, to the end users, to make those decisions, to get those insightful outcomes and trends. That's where we're seeing a lot of investment come in. So in some cases, it's a boon, the fact that, yes, we are seeing more data focus, but then the cost is really one of the other driving factor that we're seeing. And I see this, even if we do, kind of the silver lining is that we're almost at the end of this COVID, hopefully. But next year, I do see that we're still going to be having these cost-sensitive approach towards analytics and towards the whole data automation process itself.
Yeah, that makes sense, what you're saying, both of you. All three of you, actually. But, yeah, the cost thing, because every organization is concerned about that. And, analytics can obviously, help on that, as well as, in some ways accelerating digital transformations in terms of trying to be more efficient and reducing cost as well. COVID aside, what is the top trend that you see for analytics in 2021, and how is your product supporting this trend? Jason, we'll go to you first, and what is the top trend that you see for analytics in 2021?
Yeah, so Fern, I don't think it's a lot different than what you described. So for me, it's about augmented analytics. And I guess I'd say this for a few reasons. And again, it's almost like we timed this from hearing your kind of wording on this. But I guess the first reason is, I guess what I found with a lot of customers is the world doesn't have enough data scientists. And so the only way to really kind of scale the value of kind of this augmented analytics technology is to scale more people that can do it. And so if you work your way up the ladder, kind of the business analysts, if they can do this type of work, that's where you're going to see the biggest bang for the buck in terms of leveraging these advanced and intelligent technologies. And at least when I kind of work with a lot of analysts, it's actually not that daunting for them to start picking up these proverbial lightweight kind of machine learning and being able to do advanced analytics themselves. And it's actually not very different than what you saw in the report writing business, I guess, 20 years ago when a lot of that was shifted to the business. So I guess that's the first one, just to be able to scale up the data scientists with augmented analytics. The second one I've been seeing of late is, and this is nothing new, but just the amount of data. And when I say data, I mean volume, velocity, variety. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. And it's almost like impossible for a human to physically look at, billions of rows of data. And so this is where you really have to rely on advanced analytics technologies like, augmented analytics to be able to read, interpret, and summarize this data from like billions of records and be able to get answers much, much more quickly. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. But like for all this to work and for all this vision to kind of work around augmented analytics, you really can't separate the data from the analytics. And so when you approach this problem, what I see a lot of times is, you really need one integrated solution. And so if you don't have that, typically what I find is a lot of customers have little siloed or fragmented solutions. And that kind of leads to almost like a bigger problem, like, proliferation and data silos, and then people, trusting the data a lot less and less. So I guess at SAP, I feel like we're actively addressing a lot of these things. So the first thing we have is we have a unified integrated solution that goes from, data integration, data storage, data preparation, and analytics, so that whole end-to-end story. And so what we find is that helps to avoid a lot of the unnecessary data movements and unnecessary data silos that a lot of times these point tools, you find yourself having to get 3 or 4 tools just to address that kind of end-to-end story. And then if I look at just purely our analytics solution, what we do within here is we deliver, business intelligence capabilities, augmented analytics capabilities, and planning capabilities kind of all wrapped together in an integrated experience. So what this means is from a user perspective, you can go from, viewing data in a dashboard or visualization, exploring it, but probably more importantly, leveraging these advanced technologies or advanced analytics and augmented analytics to find out, customer trends, find out cost areas, find out stuff around your forecast. And then the best part about it is once you've done all that analysis, you could then start to do some what if and some planning and actually write it back to a system record to really kind of give that closed loop decision-making process. So just to kind of summarize it, I think augmented analytics is something we're seeing huge in the market today, really to kind of address the problems that you summarized, Fern.
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw, some of the AutoML tools, they frightened me, but I have to say, because I was concerned about, how people would use them. But I myself am becoming much more comfortable in seeing, definitely seeing the benefits of the tooling, and especially, as it's providing more explainability, on the back end and that sort of thing, to help the users. Bhupesh, how about you? What's the top trend that you see in analytics for 2021? And if you want to say anything about how your product is supporting this trend.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of second Jason's point about augmented analytics, because that augmentation really helps drive the customer's use of that data. But at the same time, I think the key challenge or trend that we're going to be facing up against is that data literacy and governance. We've been seeing kind of precursors of governance in the last year and 2020. And I think that's what's going to be pushing the need for data literacy for the end users, for the business analysts to really understand what the data means before they can go in and kind of derive the insights necessary. And and we're seeing that in reference with the self-service capabilities that business analysts want to do. They want to kind of get away from needing data scientists every time to be able to get to data. Kind of, it helps along with that augmented analytics side, and really brings that data availability in, to the end users. From a wine perspective, our product really sits in front of the analytics after all that transformations and models and everything. Those are all done. They're all available. They're in production. We kind of come in to help the ease of use for the business analysts or the business users to go in and understand what is it that their data is talking about? What's the story behind their data? And that's where a lot of our customers start using wine in a self-service environment embedded within their line of business products and stuff.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And that data literacy, we definitely see that, as I mentioned, as a top priority, and certainly self-service as well. Darren, what about you? What is the top trend that you see for analytics in 2021? How is your product supporting this trend?
Yeah, I think one of the topics that's really interesting that we're seeing emerging, and I think it's early days in terms of large-scale adoption, but I think it has the potential to be most transformative in the enterprise, is about really being able to transition from continuous or deliver continuous intelligence and then close the loop between that continuous intelligence and facilitated action, and in some cases automated action. And it's a design pattern which I think encompasses things like being able to deliver real-time analytics that are integrated into business operations. And obviously you need to leverage current and historic data to inform those decisions. But the key ingredient to deliver true continuous intelligence is really having a solid understanding of the business moments of those events. And to understand the business moments to apply, or what we refer to often as context, you have to have a deep understanding of not just a snapshot of the data or a snapshot of the analytics, and not even just to be able to predict based on models and classification schemes, but also really bringing together the disciplines of process mining into the capabilities. And so continuous intelligence for mine is really bringing together deep understanding of business process with the underlying analytics skills and capabilities and that information. And then the second piece I touched on is to be able to close the loop to action. So let me try and bring that to life. An example of kind of supply chain, when many of the driving facets around, for instance, vendor management and procurement life cycles are things like lead time for delivery. And you can imagine in today's world how that's been turned upside down as the entire supply and distribution channels change, or the reorder points or safety stock levels that are in the underlying application system. To really help inform your decisions around continuous intelligence, you need to be able to understand not only the current snapshot and state of demand, or the current snapshot and state of supply of raw materials into your production and manufacturing processes or fulfillment, but you also need to marry that data up against your driving facets inside the business that I mentioned around reorder points or stock levels, and then provide capabilities to close the loop to actually make those updates in the applications that are driving those material planning cycles and life cycles. So in today's real world, we see many of the customers that we serve today across the Fortune 500 delivering consumable and detailed insights on hyperscalers. We see a lot of cloud transformation. We see them seeking to solve business problems around perfect order fulfillment and increased loyalty, rush order demand. We see lower inventory and holding costs as a key outcome that better process intelligence and closing the loop to action. And then obviously also about reducing processing bottlenecks in the manufacturing life cycle. So I think that the real transformative pieces for the business is really connecting what you said early on as an emerging trend around RPA, but connecting that process automation with true continuous intelligence. And that's what I think will drive the most disruption and the most potential longer term.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, organizations, when you ask them what's the best practice for analytics, they're always talking about, operationalizing and taking action. And interestingly, this, like in the survey that we have out now, they're saying that they want to become more real time, and it's probably in part because of what happened with COVID. But yeah, the continuous intelligence. I agree with you. Sort of continuous intelligence, continuous decision management, RPA, all of those things, can really drive transformation. All right, let's move to question 3. So again, COVID aside, what do you think is going to be the biggest data and analytics challenge impacting organizations in 2021, and what do you think that they should do about it? Bhupesh, let me ask you that question first. What do you think is the biggest data and analytics challenge for 2021?
This, I think, is a good segue from what Darren was talking about just now, about the process side. I think the process side is going to be the biggest challenge here. We're seeing a lot of customers that have data all over the place, especially with COVID, as they had to move away from the office space. They found that data is siloed. And one of the business process aspects is building that data pipe to bring all that data together, keeping the lineage documented and detailed to promote the trust in that data. That's I think the next challenge that we see, because as data moves to the cloud, as it gets virtualized, we need to track the data, where it came from, whether it's trustable, how much trust we can impart on that data, and how to use it best. So it kind of ties into that process and RPA side of things. But I think the challenge really is making sure the data is trustable when you bring it away from the silos, and your data pipe is automated to provide the data for analytics a lot faster and at real time.
Is there something that you can provide, in terms of how to make the data more trusted and, building the pipelines? Is there anything?
I think the biggest part there is the automation aspects and the RPAs. I think Darren's right in saying that that's what we will see happen more and more. The robotic process automations to use those along with the business process side, as well as the data processing side, to keep the data trusted and defined at the same time as making it available in a governed and secured manner to users and analysts.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, automation, helps with, making sure things are standardized and, not a lot of errors. So Darren, since Bhupesh was talking about what you were saying, what do you think that the biggest data and analytics challenge that organizations are facing in 2021 is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably two areas I hear repeatedly when talking to customers. One is governance, and the other is leveraging the cloud transformation for growth opportunities and business innovation. I think those are the two areas I hear repeatedly, in addition to the desire to drive more process automation that I spoke about earlier. I think governance, and some of this is further compounded by, just the pervasive adoption inside the enterprise of differing technologies for business intelligence, as well as, siloed, data silos across the enterprise, which are now often being moved to cloud environments. And when you're in a situation like that, having a consistent view of information across those environments is really important. But also equally important is having the security and governance and access to that environment. Obviously, companies can't just provide unfettered access, particularly to the most valuable data inside the enterprise. So we actually work with customers to provide and deliver out-of-the-box solutions that sort of inherit the security and control behaviors, as well as the embedded catalogs and functional business intelligence inside the business intelligence technologies across all of the leading BI technologies as part of that solution. I think the second one around leveraging cloud to transform the business is an interesting one, and it's one that we hear a lot about cost optimization and efficiency. I actually think there's an increasing amount of organizations turning towards the hyperscalers for true innovation, and we see, we help customers, accelerate that journey in terms of onboarding the data from the core enterprise applications, and not just, migrating the raw data from those environments, but really with the embedded intelligence around the model so that they can drive, rapid, iteration around new business initiatives, serving new customers, introducing new service opportunities, and then be able to, using the continuous intelligence to be able to assess whether those are working or not working, or how they could be tuned and optimized. So I think really bringing that innovation edge to how you take advantage of the new infrastructure is some of the opportunity. It's not just about managing risk with governance. It's also about growth and expansion of service provisions.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially, as we come out of COVID, it's going to be more important than ever. Jason, how about you? What do you think are some of the biggest data and analytics, or what is the biggest data and analytics challenge that organizations are facing?
Yeah, so for me, it's not really about technology. It's, as I think you guys both echoed, it's more about people and process. And so I think one thing is, and Bhupesh talked about this, I think we just have to improve our overall data literacy. And so I work with a lot of organizations where this, interesting enough, is still a huge, huge challenge. So they get tons of reports, tons of metrics, but they fundamentally struggle for, like, how do they interpret the data? How do they act on it? What's the data mean? What's it telling me? And in a way, it kind of sounds silly, but it's something that most organizations are struggling with. So I would say on the data literacy stuff, so I see a lot of people instituting programs, putting a lot of documentation around what these metrics mean, how to act on it, how to make decisions off this stuff. So I think that's more of a soft side of things. And I do agree with some of the comments about the, trust in data and trust data models. The other thing I would say, though, back to the governance and trust in models and things like this is I feel like the days of these, data lake projects and these long kind of IT projects are kind of gone. And so one of the things I kind of encourage most of my customers as they're kind of embarking on these new projects is think about quick wins. So try to start small and, fail fast, because nobody seems like they're signing up for very long, expensive projects to implement. So.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. We see organizations, more advanced organizations, doing some interesting things around helping to build data literacy in their own organization, but I think that they still have a ways to go, and that's sort of echoed in our data. So I agree with what you all are saying for sure. I want to leave time for Q&A at the end. I had one or two other questions. I'm trying to decide, which, to sort of do a lightning round, and maybe I'll do this is I'm going to ask you in sort of a lightning round view of the world, what best practice do you recommend, because we're talking about building trust, for building trust in data for analytics. Jason, since you were talking about that, do you have, sort of one best practice that you want to share before we go to the audience Q&A period?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is one best practice, but I think what's key to all this stuff, having, a strong alignment between the business and IT groups. And I find when a business is running around doing their own thing, or IT is building something, expecting the business to use it, this is where there's no trust at all. And so one best practice that I've seen a couple organizations do is they have these center of excellence. They have a center of excellence group, and they have a line of business sponsors that are part of that COE group. And one of the things they rely on that line of business sponsors to be able to do is everything from requirements gathering, champion these things, providing first level support. And the more ownership you could put in the business and you work together, I feel like the better it can be. But when these groups aren't talking together, they're not part of a team, they're not working towards a goal, I feel like that's where the mistrust kind of builds. So I think one good best practice is having that center of excellence and having business people being part of them, even though they're just maybe a matrixed or virtual part of those teams.
Yeah, we see that often. Bhupesh, how about you? What best practice do you recommend for unifying data and building trust?
I kind of second Jason's opinion there, but before, one of the things that I recommend for this Center of Excellence is to kind of become literate in the organization data. A lot of times, these Center of Excellences are not yet literate about the complete set of data that's available to them, and they're not talking the same language in itself. A sales guy may be talking about revenue, and the finance guy may be talking about profit, but they're both dollar figures, and they kind of look at them in the same data. So and that builds a lot of untrusted data. So I think data literacy is one of the things that we've seen come from this data governance and Center of Excellence approach, which I totally agree with Jason on. But that's, I think, one of the best practices that we'll focus on over the next year to kind of build that trust and unify that data further.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Darren, how about you? What best practices do you recommend for unifying data and building trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we haven't talked a lot about, which I think is really interesting in that space, is something introduced around ML operations. And I think, machine learning can learn a lot of lessons from the more mature disciplines that have been established inside organizations around DevOps. And DevOps, charters drive things like continuous delivery. How quickly can you introduce new models into production when circumstances change? Just think about, I don't know, I know examples in the world of people in the front line working on prediction models around COVID spread. As and when your assumptions, you change it around indirect spreading versus demographics that are more exposed to spreading. Those things need to be built into the models really quickly. And so rapid deployment capabilities, quality-driven engineering around explainability and building that into your machine learning models and how to apply those. White box testing, not black box testing. There's lots of things that are in our control in terms of data preparation. So, I guess in summary, there's a lot in terms of observability and active debugging as part of that process. Those lessons that we've learned over the last decade or so as we deliver DevOps for cloud, I think many of those apply to MLOps and best practices. And I think we're just really at the beginning of understanding how to leverage those going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I alluded to that, a little bit when I was talking about what the MLOps group, would do. I mean, they're basically looking at machine learning, like the model is a piece of software, so that you need to be using those same principles around that. And I agree that, we're just at the beginning of that journey for sure. All right, well, with that, as I said, I want to make sure we have time for audience Q&A. So, Jim, I'm going to hand it back over to you to do some audience Q&A. Thank you to our panelists, and hope you're ready for some audience questions now.
I've got two questions that are somewhat related. Do you think most companies will start to move to a cloud-only model in 2021? Wonder if that makes sense. And for the companies that are shifting to the cloud, how is that impacting how they prioritize analytics?
Someone want to take that question? Or?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to jump in. I didn't know it was going to be directed to anyone. I mean, I think we're certainly seeing a rapid acceleration of the migration to cloud, but I certainly, in terms of the companies that we serve today, typically large enterprises, mid to large size enterprise companies, they have a fairly large and significant workload that exists today on premise. And so I think they're moving, we see a lot of them moving for all their new initiatives to cloud, and that has an implication longer term. But there's still a significant amount of workload and established and high value assets on premise. So I don't think it's binary. I think it's more about where the new workloads are going, and that's directionally, there's no question that's happening. But they live in that hybrid world, and that hybrid world, to answer your question, I think means that they need technologies to enable that connectivity across those environments that's optimized for on-prem to cloud. It means that they need governance models that are expansive across both the on-prem controls as well as the cloud. And I think it also means that, as those organizations move to those models, they have to make some fairly challenging decisions about, multi-cloud strategies versus focusing on, individual cloud providers, and I think there's not avoiding some of the concerns that they have around lock-in longer term, to make sure they remain a certain degree of agnostic to that environment.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add to that is I don't think it's an all or nothing. To your point, it's not a binary thing. I think a lot of the new initiatives, new projects are all looking to go up to cloud, but most companies have like these 20-year-old investments in these on-premise software, and there's no way they're moving up these systems up to the cloud from day one. So I think where I'm seeing, and I think this is spot on to your point, is new initiative of the cloud, but then they're looking specifically at hybrid capabilities to be able to leverage that data, those capabilities, be able to bridge kind of those two environments together for the user in a somewhat seamless experience. So that's the thing I would add, but just reinforce some of those points.
Just one point to kind of reiterate what Jason said earlier as well. Just as the end result, that in terms of prioritizing these initiatives, I do see customers looking for those quick wins. So smaller projects, quicker wins, to further kind of push the initiative going towards the cloud. And like Darren said, it's a transition. It's not a switch.
Okay, looking ahead at 2021, do you expect small and mid-sized enterprises will realize the benefits of AI and BI systems? And can they even afford a BI or AI solution right now?
So I think many of them, I would say, are realizing the benefits today. And I think from a cost perspective, typically a lot of times they could start small and then start to grow. So I think a lot of times cost is not the driver. I think the bigger issue a lot of times with these organizations, do they have the right people in place to be able to do these things? And so I think the technology is definitely affordable. I think a lot of times the data is there to support it. I think the learning, it's just, do they have the right people in place? And so what I see a lot of these small organizations doing is augmenting that with, subject matter experts, whether it be consultants or partners and things like that, to augment kind of that skill set that they might be lacking.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Jason's absolutely right. I think what's interesting about the paradigm in my mind is, for ML initiatives to be successful, you really need to combine the state of the art of what's possible using the learning algorithms and how to avoid, unfair biases and undesirable outcomes, but also you need to combine it with the business subject matter expertise to really prioritize the most relevant, data facets are fed into that process, and you've got the right filter process and testing processes around it. And so I think, injecting expertise on the state of the art and combining with the business expertise is absolutely possible for the enterprise. And it's not a technology problem. That technology, frankly, has been around for a while. It's just getting easier and more accessible.
Yeah, I'd second that. But the part that I kind of, in a way, have been seeing with our customers is that they can start small, but as the data comes in, there's a scale factor. With the small and medium businesses, that scale becomes quickly unaffordable. So you need to start looking at overall cost of ownership long term when you're doing these implementations, whatever tool that you're using. You need to look at it not as an immediate cost, but also a long-term cost. What is it going to cost me over time? Because once you start with an AI or a BI implementation or kind of deploy these systems, you can't just switch them off. It's a big investment. You have to do the right investment. But I do second Jason's point there that the technology exists. The capability to learn the technology, it's becoming easier and easier with AutoML and augmentation and all. It's the cost that's the long-term cost, I think, that's going to be driving it further.
Well, we've talked a lot about different technologies and projects. I'd like to ask each speaker to identify the one skill they think is most needed in an organization, and how do you fulfill that skill? Is that something that you train internally? Do you hire outside? How do you get that skill? Fern, would you like to go first?
Oh, I get to talk? Okay. I
sure.
think, well, one skill, let me think. How about critical thinking? Because, that will enable you to, sort of think about not just, what you see coming out of a self-service analytics, BI tool, but also, if you have that skill, I think it can help you, move ahead with machine learning. And there's different ways to get that skill. Come to a TDWI class if you don't already have it. Critical thinking.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is aligned to critical thinking, but one thing is just understand the bigger picture. So sometimes people are really obsessed with, hey, this is a metric, I need to report for this and this, but sometimes you have to know the better, like, what's the why behind it? What kind of decision are we looking to drive, and what kind of information do we need to support that decision? So almost like taking a bigger picture perspective, I think, is a big area.
Yeah, I was going to say
one skill. Oh, go ahead, Dylan.
I apologize. The one thing I was going to say is similar. I would say it's the business process expertise and making sure that there's a solid understanding of the business implications and factors that weigh into the analytic decision-making processes. I think all too often, even while we still talk about self-service BI and we talk about bringing learning models and AI intelligence to our decision-making process, a deep understanding of the business expertise of the business processes and activities and facets, I think, is really foundational to transformative intelligence.
So I kind of was going to say something which covers all three. My point was really about communicating that data and that information. So it kind of, you have to look at the big picture and you have to kind of be data literate. But that's the one skill I think is not as prominent among the data analysts in terms of communicating what is it the insight is telling us, what the data is telling us. And that area about bringing that insight to become an actionable item for the business, that part I think is going to be key for the next year.
Okay, we've got, since we're running out of time, I have a couple of lightning round questions for you. Yes or no, do you see any growth in the MDM space in 2021?
Like mobile device management or master data management?
They don't specify.
I think master data has always been key. I'll let the other people, I don't see that come up as much because I feel like people have good tools and process around that. They haven't mastered it internally. But I don't see master data, aside from it being a topic, I don't see it coming up from a tools perspective as much anymore.
Yeah, we hear it as a requirement for better quality analytics and being able to converge data across systems. But it's not the end. It's a means to an end, and we hear them starting with the end, which is around delivering the analytics or the continuous intelligence or the automation capabilities, and treating master data as an important facet of getting to that outcome.
It's lower on our list, when we ask people questions, what I would say.
Okay, how about any comments or thoughts about the future of data virtualization?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of interest in data virtualization for sure.
Yeah, I think there's no question that there's more interest in it because of the just because of the increasing fragmentation of data. So yes, increased interest. I wouldn't have said there's been a massive leap in technology and around that space that's come to market yet. So I think that's definitely an interesting place to watch.
I agree. I mean, data virtualization is kind of growing. But yeah, not from a technology perspective, I think we have a lot of technology already out there to facilitate it.
Okay, final thoughts. Data lake versus enterprise data warehouse in the cloud.
Both.
They're both. They're merging.
Sure.
I agree both.
Okay.
I agree both. I mean, lakes and clouds, or lakes and warehouses, they have completely different use cases. I think there are benefits of both, and it really depends on how you want to use your data.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think people have tons and tons of data you need to be able to store in a very cost-effective way, so like massive amounts of data. But at the same time, to support analytics projects, typically doesn't work well to go against the data lake, so you need to be able to process that data in a way that's consumable by different analytics products. So that's where you need the data warehouse, I find.
Yeah, 100%. People moving their data to data lake environments, and I'm seeing increasing patterns around what became known as drinking from the lake to feed analytics workloads, and as well as enabling self-service discovery on the data lake. So definitely see both as really important.
Okay, here's our final question. Can you offer some best practices for data governance as my organization evolves to the cloud?
I think one of the key practices, I think we talked about this, Jason talked about it as well, build a center of excellence committee to define what that governance means for the organization, and ensure that your business is data literate, and push that data training and data literacy.
Yeah, I just don't think that technology is going to solve all the problems here. It's a people, process, and technology to look at the bigger scope around this. But I do agree. I think data literacy, developing a center of excellence, being able to work with the business to get alignment on that, all those things are instrumental. And I feel like technology is probably the easy part when you look at that.
I agree with all of that. Only thing I would add is also about developing a strategy for multi-cloud or single cloud, and making sure that you understand the long-term implications of some of that decision making.
We're out of time here, so let me take a moment to thank our speakers today, and also thank you to Magnitude Software, SAP, and Wine Enterprise by Grape City for sponsoring today's webinar. Please remember that we recorded today's webinar, and we will be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation. Feel free to share that with colleagues. And don't forget, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the click here for a PDF line. Finally, I want to remind you that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, webinars, and information on business intelligence, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. So I encourage you to tap into that expertise at tdwi.org. And with that, from all of us here today, we say thank you very much for attending. This concludes today's event.